Hello everyone, I've just read Chapter 4 of The Last of the Jedi, Death on Naboo. So there's not really a whole lot to talk about this chapter, but you pretty much just get to see what life is like in the prison. And we get to see a little bit of Ferris's plans. So let me just go to the start, because this is one of those chapters where you kind of need to look. So the brief conversation he has with his cellmates, which he's learned is prisoner number 934890, was actually one of the few conversations he'd have with him. Interactions in general, really. At least conversations. And most of what he would say pretty much amounted to move your boots. And he didn't really say anything else, really. He never gave anything else. And we learn that within a day, Ferris became accustomed to the routine because he had to, and that any hesitation about pretty much anything would land you with a blow from a force pike on one of the guards. And that his Jedi training allows him to kind of read the room and read how people move, and he was able to start mimicking how they kind of have an exhausted shuffle walk. And it's what the Jedi would call see without looking. And he was starting to plan escaping, but he didn't quite. But the main problem was the just sheer impossibility of it. He knows he's on a jungle world, and there's only one spaceport, which is pretty much in the air, and there's a small landing platform outside of the prison, and there were very few exits that he could see. We learn that the prison is a square inside a square, and they work in the factory all day, pretty much, and that they went through a bioscan to pretty much for them to know just how much nutrition the droids need to give to the prisoners to keep them going. They give them the bare minimum for them to survive, which, that's again highlights the cruelty of the Empire. But we learn that the factory where they work, which they go through an underground tunnel, is what is Ferris's escape plan, and that he knows that what their work is obviously something important to the Empire, and that there had to be a pickup service and a delivery supply service. And he assumes that it's most likely going to be the same ship, and that ship will be how he gets out, but he needs to learn the routines and how it works a little bit more. And he starts thinking about how he wished he kept his lightsaber, but he couldn't bear for him to be captured with it. He couldn't... Hold on. Okay. Anyway, he just couldn't bear the thought of his lightsaber winding up with all the other lightsabers in the temple, in the storage room, and each light, especially given it was given to him by Gavin Mullen. Again, it may be Mullen, it may be Mullen, but I'm going to go with Mullen. I've struggled with his name throughout since he appeared in since he was first mentioned in Dark Warning, and appeared in it. And he just found the sight of it heartbreaking up the rooms. And we learn that the silence there is kind of starts getting on Ferris's nerves. He didn't find himself to be much of a social person. He never considered himself that. But after he left the Jedi, he realised that a life of solitude was just not for him, and that he didn't like to always live inside his own head. And that's of course when we learn about how the nutrition goes on, and we learn that the droids, they flash a scanner at the ID tag, and it tells them just how much nutrition they need. And we learn that it's some mealy glop and a mysterious portion of something. But to Ferris, it was still nourishment, and he would eat whatever was given to him because he needed strength when the time came. And so the droid gives him what he needs, and he keeps thinking about the food, and he can't even remember the last time he had a meal, and but he thinks, oh, it must have been back at the Underworld Inn, at the if you remember from the last book. But he was so intent on the idea of food that he wasn't alert when the prisoner ahead of him took his food off his tray and took it for his own in a move that he had to have done loads of times. We learn that he's tall with enormous feet and hands and grey stubble, and in a lightning flash of reflexes, Ferris puts one knee into the prisoner's back, puts his arm around his throat, takes back his lunch, and continues on. And the guards don't turn around in time to see him, and they start punishing. And one of them hits the prisoner and tells him to keep moving. And he starts reaching for his tray and trying to get his food back on it, and the guards that pushes it at bay. And I don't think there would be royal guards here, so I assume they're just stormtroopers with force pikes. But yeah, so and Ferris just keeps on walking, and he quickly eats, and he decides he was lucky. And as they're going back to the factory, his cellmate says to him, "That was a mistake." Ferris his cellmate says to him, "That was a mistake." And Ferris just tells him, at least he kept his lunch, which again, Ferris probably for his remarks. And his cellmate tells him that your lunch is the least of your problems, my friend. You just tangled with prisoner 6-7. Your problems are just beginning. And if you remember, in chapter 2, he was sworn to not interfere with prisoner 6-7. And yeah. So whoopsie on Ferris's part. I know the next chapter is going to focus on Trevor, because literally the first line in that chapter is Trevor. So I know it's going to focus on him, and again, not really a whole lot to talk about for this chapter, but it is an insight into just how cruel the Empire are, I think, and it's a nice... Say nice! It's a good chapter to kind of show the lives of these people. How some of them have done absolutely nothing wrong, but they were just presumed to do something wrong, because speculation was enough, and now they're punished to work pretty much all day, every day. They can't talk to each other. They have barely any nutrition. They only have enough to have strength to keep working. And it's really heartbreaking. It really is, and it's a very good look into how cruel the Empire is, because I think a lot of the times, we see the Empire and I view them as this big evil force. But I don't think we often go into detail about just how cruel they are. And this went into detail about how cruel they are to the prisoners, and it really is just heartbreaking. It really is. So, yeah. Anyway, I think that will do it for this quick review. Again, not really a whole lot to talk about. It did kind of frustrate me that, you have that cliffhanger with Trevor and then you go straight back to Ferris. I was kind of expecting us to go back to Ferris and Malorban, but it was, you have Trevor and Ollie on a literal cliffhanger, and them starting to fall down to the ocean, presume maybe even to their deaths. I know Trevor survives. I don't think Audien does, but I know Trevor survives. And it really just is, you have to leave us on that cliffhanger, don't you? But and then the next chapter's going to focus back on Trevor, so we'll get the answer to what happens to him. So yeah. Anyway, thank you all for watching, and goodbye. Hello everyone, I've just read chapter... Actually, what is the chapter? I think it's 5. Yeah, chapter 5 of The Last of the Jedi, Death on Naboo. So then, we open up with Trevor and Audien falling into the water, and it's quite a big drop, as it's described a little bit later on. And actually I'm surprised they survived, but, you know, survived the fall. But, Trevor feels them going lower and lower because, of course, falling from the air down into the water, and he starts trying, and Audien's trying to swim up, but he can only use his feet. And Trevor can't breaks away from Audien, but Audien still keeps hold of him with one arm, and the two try to start paddling up, and eventually they get up. Hold on. He also Trevor was thinking he didn't want to die underwater. But Trevor doesn't quite know how to swim, but he's able to keep himself afloat, and there's shattered pieces of stormtrooper armour, and there's dead stormtroopers, and there's metal and debris in the water that's too hot to touch. And Audien says that Trevor shouldn't be doing too much motion or will tire himself. And Trevor thinks that acceptance is the key to survival. Actually, it could be the key to everything. Hey, thanks everyone, Trevor thought. Maybe there's something in that Jedi stuff after all. And Trevor discovers that he's not actually keeping himself up without as much energy as he probably was expecting. And we learn that he also doesn't really like water. And Audien says that they have to find solace, but there was no doubt she was alive. And so they paddle through, and they find someone hanging onto a piece of wreckage. And I'm so glad that it's this character, because we were led to believe he was dead. And if you watch my Underworld reviews, you know I really like the character of Keats. And at the start of Trevor's first chapter 3 in this book, it was implied Keats was dead. I am so happy he's alive, because he really is my favourite member of the Erased. And we learn that he slid down the leg of the scaffolding, and he was surprised he didn't drown, as the piece of debris he's holding onto is probably the only thing out there that floats, and it almost fell on top of him. And he asks what's the plan to solace, and it also took Trevor a moment to realise, oh, it's Keats, just because of how blackened and bloodied his body is. But Audien says that they need to find solace, and that she's going to have an escape route, and Keats just says, that doesn't sound much like a plan. Okay, Audien said dryly, now I know you'll leave, you're giving me a hard time already. And that's when they see some ripples in the water. And of course they can't be sure as to whether it may be a sea creature. They assume the sea creatures would have gone deeper to avoid all the debris and etc. But you know, maybe it's an inquisitive or hungry sea creature, and I actually forgot about the sea creatures on their way up to Solace, as in the place Solace. But yeah, I forgot about them. But and it was, oh yeah, they exist when this was brought up. But then it turns out no, it's not the sea creatures. It's Solace, as in the character Solace. And she asks if they're ready to get out of here, and Keith says yes, and Solas asks what about the others, and there's a bit of a moment where they can't go over Raya, whatever it's meant to be, maybe higher, no I think it's Raya, and how she died, how Hume died trying to save a group that was surrounded, how Raya, we don't really know what happened to her, but Trevor said that he saw her die. Gillian Spence went to the rear flank, and that's where the heaviest fighting was, and they're almost certainly dead. And Curran was caught in the fight. As they refer to it as the firestorm, when they were burning down the houses. And Keats just shakes his head and goes, "Poor Curran, he was just a kid," which actually came as a bit of a surprise to me. But Solas says that they'll need to get out, and they can get to her transport, and it's not far. And they hide behind a piece of wreckage because they start hearing an airspeeder go by, and it lands on the what remains of the platform above them. And the stormtrooper commander runs over, and as it turns out, it's Malorum. And Malorum asks for a report, and the stormtrooper commander says that over half their forces have been lost. And Malorum just tells him, "I don't care about your losses, where are the rebels?" And he explains that they wiped out the community, including the arrays that they were tracking. And when Malorum asks about Solas, he says that she's dead. And that's when Malorum requests to see the body, and the commander says that she fell in the water, and that's when Malorum asks, "Did you see her fall?" "Yes." "Did you see her drown?" "I saw her go into the water." "Get some lights down there," Malorum roared. "I want a body." And that's when Solas knows that they've got to swim for it, and there's lights shining down there. Solas says that she'll take Keats, and Olian can take Trevor, and she hands aquata breathers to Keats and Trevor, and we learn that Olian has one of his own. And Keats protests, saying that no one has to take him, but Solas just says, "Don't argue, it gets on my nerves," and they start swimming, and as they're swimming through, the stormtroopers start opening fire on the water and start dropping grenades. They don't know they're down there. They probably know they're down there, but they don't know they're still alive down there. But it's probably just on the command of Malorum to fire randomly, to intimidate and hopefully kill them. And Olian's getting tireder and tireder, and he's trying, and he keeps up fairly well, but eventually Solas has to come back for him and hook him up to hook a line to his utility belt and carry Keats, Olian and Trevor. And once they get to safety, Solas just looks back at the wreckage of a place, and Olian apologises, and she just says that it's all right, and that it was her fault for being away, and that she was still there, she could have got them all out in time. And she says it was and she says, "I had a plan, but they had a spy. It was Duro, my trusted assistant. It had to be. They got to him, offered him money, threatened him, and he agreed to betray us." And she explains that he was the only other person with access to the warning system, and even knew about the warning system, and says that he must have had to have turned it off. And Olian says, "I'm afraid you're right, because he saw Duro being given a speeder to escape him." And Solas says that, "So you see, it was my mistake that killed them. I trusted him." And Olian says that there's always a good reason, that there is always a reason to only have two people know about and share information, and anymore runs the risk of betrayal, especially in resistance. and it's the first fall of resistance, and Soros just says, I know I chose the wrong person to trust, and Orion says that traitors exist everywhere, but Soros doesn't have much interest in continuing the conversation. So she asks if Keats is conscious, and Keats just says, of course I'm conscious, he growled. Would I miss all the fun? And she asks if Keats can make it a little bit farther, and that they will all have to swim on their own for about 20 metres, because she has a duplicate ship hidden beneath the water, but she needs to get there on her own, and that's it's her last resort. And she says, I guess we reached it, and Keats just says, if there ever was a last resort, this is it. And Olion says that he'll help Keats too, and so Solus goes under the water, and Olion, Keats and Trevor swim forward for about 20 metres, and Trevor takes a vow that after they get out of here he'll learn to swim. And you can see that Olion is just really tired now. He's moving slower and more cumbersomely, as it's described, and he looks at Keats and sees that he's so pale, he's shaking, and that he's having to push his body beyond its own endurance. And it says, just when Trevor thought he would gladly give up and sink under the cold water, they saw the glint of jewel steel, and suddenly the starship was above them, hovering. And we also learn that at some point along the way of swimming, Olion, for some reason his name just went blank in my head for a moment. We learn that Olion kicked his boots off in the water at some point. But anyway, Olion pushes both Keats and Trevor on board. Solus helps Olion get on board. Solus puts Keats on a bunk. Olion and Trevor kind of fall into chairs in the cockpit, and that's when she takes off without a word, and Trevor doesn't know, and the last line is, Trevor didn't know where they were headed, and he was too exhausted to care. And that's where we end off the chapter. Again, not really a whole lot to talk about, but I'm really happy Keats is alive, hopefully. It's no secret that I liked Keats, and he was a personal favourite character of mine, I think, so far in Last of the Jedi. And I'm happy he's alive, because I really thought he was dead. But no, he's alive, and I'm really happy that he is. I think really the most important part to really talk about, I think, is how Solus is taking the blame for it, and you can see why, because this was meant to be the place where people could go and be safe from the Empire, but now it's an absolute ruin, and it's quite clear that no, it's not safe from the Empire. And I think you really do see Solus's pain, and you really do see how much blame she's taking for it. Even though it wasn't necessarily her fault, she still takes a lot of the blame for it. So I think that was quite impactful. There was that line with Trevor where it was acceptance does seem to be the key. Maybe it's the key to everything. Hey, thanks everyone. Maybe there is something in those Jedi teachings. I'm curious as to what the acceptance was, because it definitely seemed like, because Trevor in the 3rd chapter, he accepted that this would be his fate. Or was it, but also here, he just didn't want to die in the water. He didn't want to die underwater. So, it's a bit curious as to what acceptance it is. Is it acceptance that he can't swim and he's doing it? Is it acceptance that that's the part that's confused me. What is the acceptance here? So yeah, that's the part that confused me a little bit. Because it's, again, what's the acceptance in the context of it being said? They've just emerged from the water, and Trevor was thinking, oh, I don't want to die, but he tries to help Ollie and get up and surface, and it's okay. So what's the acceptance there? So yeah, it did confuse me for a moment. Or was it because Ollie said to not waste motion because he's going to need the strength, and Trevor's floating quite easily, and it's okay, acceptance, and it's still a bit what's the acceptance there? So if you have an idea of what it could mean, drop it in the comments, because that's something that did confuse me a little bit. It was, okay, what's the acceptance? And it still, to me, isn't clicking. Maybe it is the fact that, okay, because it definitely doesn't seem to be, okay, I can't swim, I accept that, because, he takes a vow to swim, a silent vow, to himself. Maybe it is just, silent. I don't know what the acceptance is. I'm trying to think. I can't think of it. I can't think of the answer. But anyway, again, not really a whole lot to talk about in this chapter. You do see Malora. He's quite. He's definitely not happy. And you can see him taking on Palpatine's advice. And yet that does bring up the question of just what is the timeline here? Because to me it does seem like Chapter 1 takes place after Chapter 2. But in the way the story's being told, it definitely seems like it takes place before. Because, it's not going to take Malorum... It's going to take Malorum about... It's not going to take Malorum... like 2 minutes to get down to the bottom of the city, is it? It's going to take him quite a while. I mean, even Malorum thinks to Palpatine, did he really expect me to go all the way down there? And so it's the fact he's gotten there quite quickly, in the context of the story, it's quite quick. It's just a bit confusing, really. It's the timeline. Well, it is what it is. But yeah, I'm going to be interested to see just actually where they are headed, aren't they? And also, are they even going to recover Toma's ship? Well, what about Toma's ship? We've left that at the landing port. And that hasn't really been brought up since, I think, like the first chapter or so of Underworld. So, that's, they were really complimenting Toma's ship about how it was one of the best ships Ferris ever rode. So, it's... What about Toma's ship? Are they going to wind up having to go back to Coruscant for the ship? It's... Are they really going to leave Toma's ship? Because for some reason I find that hard to believe. But, yeah. Anyway. I'm excited to get on the ramble now, aren't I? So, thank you all for watching, and I'll see you all next time. Goodbye. Hello, I've just read Chapter 6 of The Last of the Jedi, Death on Naboo. So we pick up with Ferris again. It does seem like we're going to be alternating between Ferris and Trevor, and Ferris and Trevor, and Ferris and Trevor, and Ferris and Trevor, and Solace, or just Ferris and Trevor, really, because I don't think Solace she may not be in every chapter with Trevor, but we never know. So we're back to Ferris, and we learn that he's only been here 2 days, and he's already kind of getting tired. He's already losing energy and strength, and he just thinks, escape would feel good right now, but without a lightsaber it's just going to be much more difficult to accomplish, and he's low on resources, and it's tough to be resourceful. And every day they would march into a factory, and Ferris concluded that it had to have been recently built. Maybe shortly after Palpatine became Emperor, and there's already cracks in the ceiling and the floors. It's sort of in stinging rain and fat, hungry bugs with pincers that are able to draw blood, and if you even flinch, the guards will jab you with a force pike. So you learn never to flinch, but work. And Ferris can't tell what they're manufacturing. You can't tell if it's a droid, if it's for droids, weapons, machinery. But he has heard rumours about an ultimate weapon, which that does kind of lead me to believe that they're trying to build the Death Star. And sometimes prisoners get taken away and are never seen again. And since Ferris's little stunt on 6-7, everyone's avoiding him, and even his cellmate, prisoner 9-3, something, plans to fake an illness, and Ferris tries to talk him out of it, and he says that he would rather die at the with a shot in the arm by Medroids than get caught in the crossfire with Ferris. And Ferris says that he can handle himself and he doesn't intend to die here, and his cellmate just doesn't have as much faith. And he says that it's all the more reason for him to go if Ferris thinks he can escape, and that's he's trouble because he just doesn't get it. There is no way out. Ferris says, well, there's always a way out, and his cellmate just goes, well, you have your way, and I have mine. And he laughs a little bit as well. He goes, well, you have my way, you have your way, I have mine. And to Ferris, it's the loneliest laugh he's ever heard. And it sounds like the loneliest sound in the galaxy, his laugh. Ferris, and he knows it's the laugh of someone ready to die. And the guards come in and escort him out. And Ferris thinks has a feeling that if he was in another life, he would have liked his cellmate's company, and that he had never known his name. Anyway, when morning comes, well, at least what he assumes is morning, because he's not seen the sky since he's been here. And also, it's all just grey Juricreeds, and it's even making the skins of everyone there go grey. But the sounds of the automatic clock snap, and they have all about 3 seconds to stand there while they get jabs with force pikes. And as he stands by the door waiting after he slips on his boots, that's when 6-7 and 4-5 other henchmen, 5, all surround him, and they push him into line. And Ferris knows what's about to happen, and he quickly kind of thinks through the situation. He's about to be attacked. He sees that 6-7 has got he's ready to almost strangle him in the same way that Ferris did, I assume. Not with the knee, but with his arm, and not knee in the back, I don't think. And the henchmen there as well are also pushing in quite tight to Ferris. They're not really allowing him much movement for his arms, and he knows he can't really fight back, because if he fights back, he's probably going to wind up killed by the guards. And he knows that, and because he'd see it happen, if prisoners stepped out of line, the guards would easily go and kill them. And he knew that if he fought 6-7, his henchmen would simply step back, break up the shield, and watch Ferris get taken away by guards. And all the results that could be yielded from attacking 6-7 would not be good. He could wind up tortured or killed. And so he ran through to his... And it all went through in about a matter of a second, really, and it says. Or it says in less time than it took for prisoner 6-7 to step up squarely behind him. And that's when 6-7 starts to have his hands come up about to crush Ferris's windpipe, as they're big enough to do that. And that's when Ferris decides to use a Jedi combat method where he attacks from behind. He turns what's typically forward attacks to backwards attacks. He's attacking himself. He's attacking them from behind himself. And so he doesn't actually properly engage. And he jabs some of the henchmen beside him. 6-7 starts to strangle him. And we also learn that this form of fighting, it was quite fun when in the room of Padawans, but in a room of a brutal prison without anything goes, it's not so fun. But he gives a sudden twist and hard jab to the henchman. 6-7 starts wrapping around his throat, and Ferris feels his vision go grey, and then suddenly, almost invisibly because of how fast it's going, a data card flies through the air. Ferris ducks just under it, and it hits 6-7 directly in the middle of his forehead, and he slumps back to the floor. And before the guards can even look at what's happened, Ferris is now back in line. With pretty much as if nothing happened, and he's not really going to be suspected. His henchmen and 6-7's henchmen are stunned, equally stunned, but they go back in line as well, emerge with the crowd. And the guards drag 6-7 away. Ferris tried to search the crowd with the Force to see who threw the data card, but he couldn't sense anyone. He couldn't sense who, and other prisoners were looking around trying to see, but they couldn't see who. And he knew that, well, they had to go back to work. And another grueling day of work, another meal of slop, as it says in the book. But he now has something that he didn't have before, and he knows exactly what it was. Because only few in the galaxy, this is what the line says, there are only a few in the galaxy who had the skill and the knowledge to turn a data card into a lethal weapon, who could throw it from that distance without being seen. One of them was his friend. And we learn that, and we get towards the end of the day. You can skip ahead to the end of the day. Ferris is putting some metal of some sheets to Durasteel. Putting some Durasteel into a machine to create continuous sheets, and not trying to get his fingers cut off, when he hears a familiar voice, and he says, fancy meeting you here, Olin. Thought you preferred classier joints. Now Ferris grins without turning to him, and he just says to him, you're going to place Flax, and we learn it's his friend Clive Flax. And it was exactly who he had hoped to see, and we learn that Clive Flax was a low-life musician, an industrial spy, and a double agent. And we end it off with things were looking up, and that's where the chapter ends. Not really a whole lot to say. Again, most of the chapter's pretty much made up of combat, about half of it really. So I think the main thing to talk about is Ferris's cellmate, and with the little bit we learned about his character in his first chapter, it is very sad that he decided that he wanted to go into the infirmary, especially because, no one ever comes back from there, and especially when he probably has a wife. He says he's living in his own fantasy world and doesn't like to be interrupted. He's on a picnic about to eat a sweet berry tart made by his wife, and he's on a picnic with his wife, and it's quite a sad thing. But you can also kind of understand why he doesn't want to get involved. He's presumably been here he's been here long enough to know how the prison works, and how there's not really much hope once you're in the Don Tamo prison, and it is quite. I think it is quite a sad thing for that to see how even some of the prisoners are willing to fake illness just to get what's coming to them early. And also, it does also say that Ferrus knows that his days are limited, and that Malorum is just letting him suffer this work for a little bit, and once he has the desire for Ferrus to be killed, he'll kill him. He'll order his execution. So yeah. But anyway, I think that not really a whole lot to say with this chapter. Again, we can't have had what goes on in the prison, how cruel it is in the previous Ferrus chapter. So yeah, in what was it? Chapter 4? Yeah, I think it's chapter 4. So yeah. Anyway, thank you all for watching, and goodbye. Hello, I have just read chapter 7 of The Last of the Jedi: Death on Naboo. So Trevor, Ollie and Keats and Solus wind up having to abandon their little ship because the passageways are just getting too narrow for them. And they start running through the passageways, and they eventually do get to the Orange District. And it just feels like it's taking forever. And Trevor can't remember the last time he slept or ate. And Solus, and they're trying to get back to Dexter Jetster, and Solus is going around in random patterns to try and stir up anyone who might be tracking them, and when she's sure they aren't being tracked, she goes and follows Ollion's directions to Dexter, and eventually we do get there after about a 2 kilometre dash from the entrance of the alleyway, and Olion accesses the door. He allows himself to be seen. Then he punches in the code, and the door opens almost immediately. They go through the hallway, go up a ramp, go through the hallway again, and they go into a security room. Right there is Dexter. And he's glad to see Solus and happy to see that the 4 of them survived. And he notices that not all of them have made it back, and Ollian says that they know Ryher and Hume are dead. They just presume Gillian Spence are dead as well, and that Curran, and they presume Curran is dead as well. And Dex says, no, not the wily Curran, he's not dead. I'm sorry, Ollian said. It's impossible that he could have survived. Impossible? No. Improbable? Yes. And Dexter explains that Curran got on an Imperial speeder and escaped. And he met a wall with some. He hit a wall with some force and looks about as bad as Keats did, which Dexter later says Keats looks half dead. So thanks a lot, Dex. But he's doing just fine now. And he takes them over to the med centre, and they see Curran, and he lights up at seeing them, and Keats just says, they can hit me, but they can't kill me, when Curran says that he saw him hit. And the med droid says that his vitals are weak, and Dex says that if they're cleared, they can go and join them in the kitchen for some food, if they're strong enough. And Keats says, I'll be cleared, and he promises that. And then the droid tells him, negative, vitals too weak. And that leads me to a very funny line that I found from Keats. And he just says, I'll be cleared, you clanking, heartless hunk of censors. Now fix me up, quick! Keats really just is like a grown-up version of Trevor. He really just is. He's hilarious. I'm so happy he's still alive, because I really thought he would be dead. So yeah, I'm very happy Keats is still alive. And Dex chuckles as well. It says once they leave, and he says that he does look half dead, and that he wagers that Keats will be up in no time, and that he's made some food for them, and so they go to the kitchen, have some food, and Dex encourages them not to talk about what's happened while they're eating, and Trevor has to stop himself from reaching for thirds. And Dex entertains them by talking about stories about the street they're in, and how it's called the Thuggers Alley, and which was slang for which thuggers was slang in correspondence for low lives and thieves. And nobody on the outside was quite sure who lived there, and so they mostly kept their distance. But Dex knows who lives there, of course, and it's people like the Arrays and those who despise what the Emperor represents and declines to live under his laws and rules. And that's when Dex says, of course, we can't fight them alone, but they'll see them coming, as they've set up an elaborate security system if the Empire do come looking for them. And Solos says that she wishes she could say the same, and Dex reassures her kindly and says, "Isn't looking back the Jedi way? Not looking back the Jedi way?" And she says something like that, and she gives a distant look. And that's when Dex moves the subject and asks where Ferris is. And Trevor says that all they know is that he was arrested, and then Trevor thinks, oh, maybe I shouldn't have eaten so much, because now his stomach's churning and going sour. The food. And Tex very warmly puts his hands on him, one of his 4 hands on him, and reassures him that there isn't a place in the galaxy that they can't find him, and that he doesn't have to worry. And Soda says that's right, they will start with the most likely prisons and move out from there, and they'll need transports because their ship doesn't have a hyperdrive. And Dex says that he can get them transports, and Trevor just points out that it's a random plan. And Solus looks startled, and Trevor assumes that she's not used to her being challenged. And Trevor says that by the time they find him, he could have been executed a dozen times, and so what they need is information. And she asks if Trevor has, and Solus asks if Trevor has a better idea. And Trevor starts thinking, and Dex says that Trevor is right, and they can't just, and if they go from prison to prison, it could take years, and the Empire has more prisons than Banthas have ticks. What we need is infiltration. And that's when Trevor notices Curran and Keats coming, which are both looking a lot stronger now and healthier. And Dex says that it's time to come out of hiding and go into the open, and they have lost good friends today, and that the other arrays have gone underground again, and that they have a sweet spot here and they're welcome to share it. It'll be safe, and he guarantees that, but once the Empire feels like looking for them, they'll have to find another place, and that it's time to join the fight, and they'll have to risk exposure and resurface. And Curran agrees, and Keats says that he's still got some contacts in the Senate. He's still got his contacts in the Senate. And Orlean says that there are a few in the Imperial Army Officer Corps who don't like where they are, and they might talk. And Dex says that he's got some friends he can ask too, but they might attract the notice of the Inquisitors, and he has no doubts they'll come looking. And Trevor asks, but why? You hardly know Ferris, you just met him a few days ago. To which Trevor is forgetting when Dexter said to Ferris, oh, I remember when Siri used to come round with you to my diner, but you know, that's not really important. And Dex just says that it doesn't matter, and they're all soldiers in the same fight now, and they'll risk what they have to for their own. And Trevor is grateful, and he knows Trevor will be touched by their help, and only hopes Trevor will live long enough to see it, and that's where we end off the chapter. First off, I am happy that Cohen is alive. Hold on a moment. So, yeah, first off, I am happy Cohen is alive. Not as happy as I am with Keats, because again, I think Keats, he's the most developed out of all the erased members, aside from maybe Dexter, but in these books specifically, he's the most developed. So I'm happy Keats is alive, but I am happy Cohen is alive as well. I'm going to be interested to see just how they go about everything, how they're going to find Trevor. Not Trevor Feathers. And again, I liked Keats' remark to the droids saying, "Now listen, you useless, heartless hunk of senses." That was hilarious. I really do like Keats as a character. He doesn't look the best canonically, but I prefer to think of him in the way I do. But yeah, anyway, not really a whole lot else to say. Again, this was a lot more of talking, but I like how Dex, he's very warm and very kind to everyone, and he's a bit like that uncle. He's a bit like an uncle to everyone. The warm, friendly uncle, and yeah, he's very sweet. So yeah, again, not really a whole lot to say. I think it was maybe a little bit humorous as just how Solace always keeps getting baffled every time she's challenged, because she's just so used to people obeying her. It's quite hilarious, really. But yeah, again, not really a whole lot else to say, and I think that may just bring the review to an end here, because again, I don't really have a whole lot to say on this chapter, and also quite a bit of the chapter was just recapping the Orange District for people who didn't read Underworld, or have got taken quite a while to go from Underworld to Death on Naboo, like when the book was published. So yeah. But anyway, thank you all for watching, and goodbye. Hello everyone, I've just read Chapter 8 of The Last of the Jedi, Death on Naboo. This is quite a short chapter, but nowhere near, it's about half the length, it's about double the length of the next chapter, which is only 2 pages. So so the next chapter is practically begging to be read. But oh no. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, maybe not. 5 pages, there's 2 for the next. Anyway. Ferrus, at night, Ferrus's doors slide open, and the guards throwing Clive Flax in. And, Ferrus just asks how did he manage to do it and get in there, and Clive answers that there is a creepy logic to this place and the regime and the Empire, and it explains that when you rule by fear, that it can have its advantages, and that he explains that there's someone in the data works section, not an Imperial person but a civilian, and that he was doing a job, and he had a slight problem with the program, and if you mess up the job here, you get a boot. He says you get a boot in the face and a transfer to someplace worse. Does that concept boggle the mind or what? And so he fixed it up for him on the sly, secretively, and after that, he owed the civilian owed him a favour, and he used it to get to Ferris. And Ferris asks what he was in for, and he explains that he was lying low under one of Ferris's false identities, and that when he saw a opportunity come up, he couldn't resist, because remember, he's a double agent, low-life musician. What was it? Low-life musician, industrial spy, double agent. And as we learn, something came up that he was interested in. He doesn't really specify which, because Ferris asks a little espionage, a tiny theft on an industrial secret, and Clive says something along those lines. But the next thing he knew, he was being arrested, and they found out what his real identity was, and the Empire, and through their usual efficiency, and he ended up here, and that was the end of it. But Ferris knows this isn't the end of that, and we get a little bit of a recap of who Clive is. I think this is Clive's first appearance in Star Wars, though, so we learn a little bit about him, and we learn that Ferris met Flax before the Clone Wars, when he was still operating Olan Lands, which, remember, that was their business. No, Olan/Lands, whatever you want to call it. And that, and again, we reminded that he and his partner, though, offered false identities for whistleblowers if they realised the law could not protect them. And Clive was among that, and they also, Olan Lands would even offer protection, but Clive never needed the defence, as he had his own style of defending himself, with skills that Ferris had never seen outside the Jedi Temple. And we learn that Clive, using his abilities as a musician, has often gone unnoticed in bars or parties, as he gathered information or stole it. And he would just say he was making a living with a shrug. And once the Clone Wars started, he saw that his skills were marketable, and so Ferris supported him immediately, and I thought of him immediately after either Clive or Ferris had been put in charge of an operation on the planet of Jabor. I don't know which one, I assume it's Ferris, but it's a bit confusing. Again, I haven't read Jedi Quest, so I'm not entirely sure the time frame for that. So I assume this is, because it sounds like this is something Ferris was doing as a Jedi, but Olan Land seems to have been established before, but Olan didn't meet Vone until after he left the Jedi. It's a bit complicated anyway. We learn that Ferris recruited Clive and sent into a separatist space as a double agent, and as a result, Ferris was able to bust a separatist spy ring that had operated through the Mid-Rim, and and so the last little bit there, and we also learn that he didn't win the war, but it certainly saved people. And the line after that after that little history is, if there was anybody in the galaxy who he'd want to watch his back, with the exception of Roan or Obi-Wan, it was Clive Flax. And he asks Clive what the plan is, and Clive goes, "What plan?" And Ferris just says, "The escape plan, I know you have one." And Clive just says, "You're right." And he says that he just needs an accomplice, and he says, "The galaxy smiled on me the day I saw your ugly mug in here. That's why I kept you alive." And Ferris says, "So you only kept me alive so you could use me?" And Clive just says, "Of course, mate. You know I only think about my own sweet self." And he grins at Ferris. And Ferris asks him to go through the plan, and he doesn't care what it is, he's in. And Clive explains that he's been stealing things for a few months, and he puts some things on the floor. Servo driver, a spoon, a droid's restraining bolt, a handful of Jura steel bits. And Ferris is just doubtful and confused. He really, what are you going to use all of this stuff for escaping? And Clive explains that if you put a small object in a piece of equipment just the right way, you can disable it, and when if it's disabled, there's a distraction. And he says that sometimes that's all you need. And he also had a Blastoid data cards too, but of course he had to use it to save Ferris. He says that the transport ship is coming tomorrow, and Ferris looks at the little objects again. He thinks sure they don't look like much, but he also notes that Clive had just saved his life with a data card of all things. And he says he's in, and that's where we end off the chapter. Again, most of this was just made up of establishing who Clive even is, so... But yeah, it's going to be interesting to see just how they escape, because, that's a really random assortment of bits. Like, what's use is there going to be for all of those? But yeah, anyway. Not really a whole lot to say, really. So, yeah. Anyway, thank you all for watching, and goodbye. Hello everyone, so I've just read chapter 9 of The Last of the Jedi, Death on Naboo. So, I did say in the last review, again, I did end that quite quickly once I finished the summary, but again, last review, there wasn't really a whole lot to talk about, really. Really, if you think about it, there really wasn't a whole lot to talk about. Maybe I could have said something about my thoughts on Clive, but we don't really know him too well yet. But anyway, onto this chapter, we learn that Malorum is in the cockpit of his private starship, so we learn that he has his own ship here, and he's on one of the landing platforms of Polis Master, and he's trying to piece together the facts in his brain, and there's too many unrelated ones, and we learn that he's used to cataloguing facts and swiftly reaching conclusions, because that's just how smart he is. But he only felt confusion, and we learn that he hates confusion, and he suspected that Senator Amidala had been treated here, but there was no evidence for it. And we learn that he knows what happened to Sankor, and that Manili Turnatel had said that Sankor has accidentally fallen off an observation platform and landed on some lethally sharp surgical instruments. And the line after that is, "Accident? Did they take him for a fool?" We learn that a source had told him a Jedi had taken Senator Amidala's body to Naboo. And of course, the galaxy believed the Jedi were the reason Amidala died. But he knows that was a lie fabricated, and he doesn't really care about that. He only cares about the truth and what really happened. Because it was information Vader didn't have, and any information Vader doesn't have, he can use against him. And Malorum thinks about the funeral, and thinks how it was so quickly organised, and how for such ceremonial people it was organised perhaps too quickly. And so he sets course for Naboo, as he found nothing on Polis Master. And instinct was telling him that his answers lay on Naboo and not with Ferrosolan. And so he decides he'll call in the execution order. And the last few lines are, "The galaxy would have one less Jedi sympathiser in it." And that could only be an improvement. And that is where the chapter ends off. Again, not like the last chapter, not really a whole lot to talk about. Really not a whole lot to talk about. We know Malorum's quite a smart guy. I think that's something we already know. So it's interesting to see even him fumbling, and that's just what is going on, so it's quite interesting to see that. And again, again, it's not really a whole lot to talk about. But, you know, he even gets frustrated at himself when he just can't figure stuff out. So, yeah. Again, like I said, really not a whole lot to talk about for this chapter. If I was struggling to talk about stuff for the last chapter, I'm struggling to talk about anything for this chapter, honestly, just because it is so short, not really a whole lot to it. So, yeah. But, you know, maybe I'll try and expand my thoughts for the last chapter, I guess. Nothing's really coming to mind, really. So never mind then. But yeah, I'm going to be interested to see how Feather Solon gets to Naboo, because I know he winds up getting to Naboo, and I know because he and Madorum have a fight there. But I'm going to be very interested to see just how he gets to Naboo and how he knows to get to Naboo. You know, I'm also going to be very interested to see how he, Trevor, Solace, Dexter, Keats, Curran, Olean, have I missed anyone? No. We'll come across him again. You know, I'm going to be very interested to see just how this all ties together. You know, so yeah. Anyway, thank you all for watching, and goodbye. Hello, I've just read, I think, Chapter 10 of The Last of the Jedi, Death on Naboo. I think it's Chapter 10. Could be wrong on that, but I'm fairly sure it's Chapter 10. I've just put the book back on its shelf, so I can't check. So, Keats and Trevor, they're going through... actually, I'm going to get the book real quick. Okay, it is Chapter 10, I was right. So Keats and Trevor are walking down a warehouse aisle in between blocks of towering garbage. Which, you know, that was actually quite a nice, nice surprise. In the previous book, you know, the Orange District was described as having cubes of garbage, and this is apparently where it's made. And Keats tells him, "I told you to regret tagging along." And Trevor tells him that it's not so bad and that he should have seen his brother's room. And Keats just looks at Ferris sharply for a moment, because Trevor sharply for a moment, because Trevor hasn't mentioned his family to him before. Sorry, I'm very short of breath at the moment. And we learn that Trevor just hates to think about his family, because it was tough coming from a family of heroes and martyrs. Now each of one of his family members died fighting the Empire, which that confused me, because his mother died early in the Clone Wars, so you know that was a bit. But you know, the Republic became the Empire, so I guess you could say the same thing. And you know, I'm fairly sure Belarsa was against the Republic. I could be wrong. I think maybe I'm mixing that up with with Ackling. I think that's Ackling. I'm not sure about Belarsa. Anyway, and we learn that Trevor has no intention of dying the way they did fighting the Empire if he could help it. And he sees Keats itch to ask further questions, but Keats stops it. And they're here to talk to one of Keats' friends, which I'm confused with the name of this. If there is anything Jude Watson really does well in confusion, it is character names, because they look like normal names, but because of the way they're spelt, you're not too sure how to pronounce it. You know, in the first book we had Amy Anton. Is it meant to be Amy Anton? Amy Anton? Because it's Maamie. And we had a Donna, you know, or Donna, because it's Donna. Or Adem. Is it meant to be Adem Anton? Or Azam Anton, because it's Adem. And we have another one here, and it's Davis, which we know it's Davis because that's spelled normally. But then it's either Jones or Jones, because it's Jones. So I'm going with Jones. And we learn that Keats had filled Trevor in on the background as they went down to meet Jones, and that we learn that he had been an influential and powerful Coruscant administrator and remained neutral during the Clone Wars, but just could not conceal his dislike for the new regulations that came with the Empire. And once the Empire found out, they sent him straight down here to garbage duty. And that's when. And then when they meet, he says, "Come to give me a hand. I think I'll pass. You disappeared. Thought it might be a good idea at the time." And anyway, then they go off to the side and have a bit of a chat about the prison. And about the prisons. And Davis says, and Keats asks if he's still hooked in with some of the senators, and Davis says, yeah, he likes to keep up with the senatorial hijinks, and he winds up saying, "I just can't help myself. It's a blast watching the senators debate how many meters wide the Coruscant flag should be while the Empire plans more death and destruction." Which, if there is anything about these books, they have good humour. And that's when Keats asks him where the political prisoners go. And he says that he's heard about, and Davis says that he's heard about a new prison world on Don Tamo. And it's a work prison. And he tells him if he's got someone in there, he has to forget them, because there's no way they're getting them out. And Trevor just clasps his hands and squeezes them behind his back because he wants to distract himself from believing it. And Davis tells Keats that it's not safe here. He knows about 3 people who are spies, and that his image was taken when he came in, and that they will eventually figure out, oh, this is Keats really. And Keats says, "I'm already on Malorum's bad side. I doubt it can get worse." And he tells him that he's on Naboo. And Jones tells him that he's on Naboo for the moment, but he needs to get lost anyway. And Keats asks him why he stays here, and that he's been banned from pretty much every profession, and that he's got kids. And he asks what else he can do, but we don't really see anything else before we move on back to everyone else, to the other erased members and Solace back at let's just call it base. And audience says that they've been able to work with the contacts in air control, and that a starship has left a landing platform of one of the high security yesterday in one of the high security prisons headed for Radiant 1. They explain that they're looking through the charts, and they've been able to narrow it down to about 15 systems. And that's when Dex tells him that there's something else that they need to know. That Keats tells him that they don't need to look any longer because they know Don Tamo is in the Radiant 1 system. And Dex tells him that the execution order has gone through for Ferris. And the silence just fills the room suddenly, and Trevor closes his eyes and just starts saying, "Not again, not again, not again," in his heart and head. And then we have the lines, "Not someone he cared about dying at the hands of the Empire." "No," he said fiercely, surprised he's spoken out loud. "We'll get there in time." You really just feel Trevor's pain here. And Sora says that she can make it there in half a day, and Orion and Cullen say they're coming with her, and Keats says that they're seeing it through, and Orion tells her that it's like Dex says it's time to fight. Sorry. Again, as I said, I've been very out of breath today. I'm glad it was a short chapter, otherwise I would have been too out of breath to read it anyway.
I quite enjoyed this chapter, and I think the main thing, and again it shows the quality of the Empire, but I think the main thing of note is Trevor and his family, because I have mentioned quite a bit, mainly when I was doing my review for Underworld, just how little Trevor's family was brought up, and how it became a very significant part of the story toward the end of Underworld. And you really just see Trevor's pain here. You really see how he's already lost his family. He doesn't want to lose Ferris, who is pretty much the closest thing he has to family now. And you really just feel for Trevor. Even though we haven't seen the stories where his family die, we still understand what it's like for Trevor. And you really just feel bad for him. And you really just want to give him a hug and tell him everything's going to be okay. And I think that's the thing with Trevor. He's a very impactful character in moments like these. And he really just hits hard. He really does. And you really feel so sad for him. So, yeah. But, hopefully they get there. Well, I know Ferris and Trevor survive, and Solus survives, you know. So, I know that they survive, but it really just is, will they see each other again? Just because even though they survive and are all in, and I know Ferris and Trevor are in all the future books, will they see each other again? And I think that's kind of like a big question. So yeah, I think so far I think Death on Naboo might just be the best of the first 4 books. I think it's topping the list so far. It is a very good book, and I'm going to be very interested to see just where it leads to. So yeah, thank you all for watching, and goodbye.
Hello, I have just read chapter 11 of The Master of the Jedi, Death on Naboo. So, we cut back to the prison, and Ferris is lying down and he's thinking over Clive's plan, which was to disrupt the loading machine that transported huge Durasteel cartons into the transport ship, but specifically disable the counting system, because they will then have to open the bay doors and count it all manually. Because if they don't get it completely precise, they're going to be accountable to some Grand Moff. And with that distraction, Ferris can then take out the guard, grab his weapon, and everyone's checking out while the other guards are watching the prisoners, because they don't want them to make any funny moves, and they're afraid that they will riot, and that by that time they'll be able to get into the freighter and then escape, and also take out the pilots in there. And Ferris thinks that there seems to be a lot of holes in this plan, but Clive says, well, nothing's perfect. And Ferris trusts Clive, and he trusts his instincts, and he also trusts that if he didn't take this opportunity, he'd be dead. And he tries to sleep, but he can't. And that's when they hear boots outside, and it's the guards coming, which again I assume are just stormtroopers. And they come in, and Clive he bolts from his side of the room over to Ferris and starts punching him. And when the guards come in, Clive just shouts, "He stole my boots!" But we learn that he did that specifically to give Ferris a restraining bolt. And the guards put Ferris into a transport cart, which you can't really see anything out of, and it's small. And He then gets taken out, and he doesn't quite know what to do with the restraining bolt. And then he gets thrown into a cell, and his execution orders read out to him, and he doesn't really care, because he doesn't really matter. And then he's left in this little cell which barely has any room to sit in, and has absolutely no room to lie down. And there's no chair either. But he's sitting there, and he's wondering what he can do with the bolt. And he knows that maybe when he gets taken to the execution room, he can then maybe use it. And he thinks back to what Clive said, where it's, you put a small object in a piece of equipment in the right way, you can disable it. Disable something, you've got a distraction. Sometimes that's all you need. And he thinks, and Ferris thinks that he'd rather have his lightsaber, but then he hears them coming, and he still has the Force, and he knows that today he would either die or escape, but the Empire wasn't be choosing that, it would be his choice. And the doors slide open, and there's 6 troopers, stormtroopers and an officer, and the officer confirms that yes, he is Ferris Odin. And they take him to the execution room. And he sees that there's a medical droid in the corner, so he sees that it's going to be a lethal injection. And as he walks past, he pretends to stumble and catch himself on the droid, and he places the restraining bolt in the droid as he's there. And the stormtrooper tells him to get off the droid, and then they move him over towards the chair, which has restraints going all the way up to the ceiling, and they then slam him down into it, and the officer tells the droid to prepare injection. The officer said. The droid didn't move. Prepare injection, the officer snapped. Restrained, the droid answered succulently. This is complicated to pronounce. Succinctly. Succinctly. What? I mean, never mind. You know what? And then he says, and then the officer just goes, "What?" When the officer turns, that's the moment Ferris has been waiting for, and he kicks one stormtrooper, and he stumbles into one of the other stormtroopers. He elbows the third, and then he uses the Force to leap over the pile and grabs 2 blasters on his way. He makes a twist in midair and blasts the droid to smithereens. And then he lands and dives away from blasts of fire. And he pretty much completely takes out the rest of the stormtroopers. As he gets up, he grabs a security card from one of the stormtroopers' utility belts, and the officer faces him. And as he opens fire, Ferris leaps up into the air, and pretty much already being an advantage in the situation. And he then what happens? He fires at the bolts in the ceiling, and all the restraints come flying down, and Ferris wraps the officer in them and flees. And now Ferris doesn't quite know where in the prison he is, because he was in the restraints box. But he knows he has to find the factory, and he wasn't sure if Clive had been able to disable the loader, but he had to assume that the plan was on schedule. And he knows that Clive would expect him to be there, and if he wasn't there, Clive would leave without him. And, well, if he could. So Ferris runs through the complex and the halls, thinks that there has to be an entrance for the guards to get in the factory, and he finds it, and he uses the security cards to get in, and He comes into the factory and the racket immediately blasts his ears. And he looks behind the machine and sees there's a line of prisoners facing their work. And there's the guards patrolling up and down and up and down. And Ferris can see that there's no disruption in the routine yet. In the distance he sees the ship and the conveyor piling all the crates on. And so he starts... Hold on. So Ferris then sees that there's an officer walking down the aisle toward the freighter and another officer... Oh, I almost lost my bookmark then. And another officer coming in the opposite direction as he hears a crackle of a transmitter from the officer walking toward the freighter. And so Ferris is covered by the noise of the machines and the regular routines of the patrolling guards. And while the guard at the freighter's back is against him, he rushes forwards and takes down the first officer. And then he keeps his head down, and Ferris runs past the turbines and grabs a handful of gears. Created by the turbines, and then we learn that the prisoners have noticed him. The guards somehow haven't, but the prisoners have noticed him. And they don't really want to help, but they also don't really want to hinder him, and they just didn't really want to interfere. They were more keen to just watch, because again they don't really have any confidence who can get out of this place. No one does. But now the bay doors are open, so presumably Clive has done his thing. And apparently he also has a handful of gears as well. But it does say the gears a little bit later on, so maybe it's the same ones from Ferris and he just hands them over to him. We don't know. Anyway, Clive, once the bay doors are open to the ship, to the freighter, and the officer starts striding up the ramp, and he's about to do the manual count, and the other officer isn't reporting to him, and so they go over there, and now they have the window time, and they know the officer will now get suspicious. And Clive comes up beside Ferris, and then the stormtroopers start opening fire on them. And they start racing up the ramp, and the stormtroopers appear, and Clive throws some of the gears down, and the stormtroopers all trip and fall. Ferris pushes them away with the force, and then Clive is surprised, but he just continues on because there was no time for questions, and he hurls the spoon towards the officer, and it hits him straight in the centre of the forehead, just like how it was before. And we have a prisoner 6-7, if you remember, and he collapses back unconscious. Ferris closes the bay doors and they rush to the cockpit. The pilots very easily submit. They raise their hands, and Clive opens the cockpit ramp. They go down before it can even fully open, and that's when they take off. And they're finally up in the sky, and then the Imperial starfighters are sent out, which again I just assume are TIE fighters. And Clive just thinks, do they have to be so stinking fast? He says, and Ferris asks what weapons they have while he pushes the speed. And Clive reviews the computer readouts and goes, not great, we got a couple of low power laser cannons, and that's it. Ferris sees the TIE fighters, I'm just going to say TIE fighters, are gaining, and the freighter is just too old. It's just old and slow. The weapons are very basic, and they can't really play hide and seek because there's no asteroid field in the vicinity, and they could try to, but they can't really. and Clive tries to keep the mood up, saying he didn't come this far to be turned into space dust. But they both look at the ships gaining out the window, and they know they're doomed, and that's where we end off. So this actually has quite a bit to talk about. I like how ridiculous and out there Clive's plan is. It really is absolutely wild, but you can kind of see it working. So it's going to be... So yeah, I'm also going to be very interested to see how Trevor, Solace and the Erased will meet them. Are they going to wind up saving them? Because that seems like the most likely possibility at the moment. I like how Ferris made his escape. I think it was quite an interesting way. I think if I have one big critique, it is that the whole scene in the factory really could have been better done, because it really was a bit of... It really just did seem like there was a bunch of stuff coming out of nowhere, and it was a bit confusing, and it definitely feels like the scenes written from Clive's plan, and you were meant to expect the planet going on, but without it being described going on, it just feels a bit... doesn't quite feel consistent, if that makes sense. It feels a bit... it doesn't quite feel right. It feels like there's pieces missing to the scene, and it makes that scene a little bit tough to follow. And you kind of need to piece together at what point Clive's plan is going on, and if we had both Clive and Ferris's point of view in that scene, I think it would have been a bit easier to understand, because I can't tell you when Clive started messing up the machines, if he did. Because from what it seems like, it's the officer going up the ramps trying to contact the other officer. He doesn't see what's going on, and then all of a sudden the stormtroopers notice them and notice Ferris and Clive, and they just make a dash for the ramp. So it's a bit... okay, what? Eh? Also, it's Ferris grabs the metal bits, but then it's Clive who uses them, and it's so I think the factory scene could have been done a lot better. It could have been much better explained, but that can happen with writing. You write it well. When you initially write it, you think you write it really well. From what it seems to be, it's written really well. And you think, oh, okay, this makes complete sense. And then you come back like a day or two later, you read it. What is this meant to mean? I only know what it means because I wrote this. And this is from the perspective of, I didn't write this, and it doesn't make a whole lot of sense. So it is a bit of a tough scene to follow. And again, I think it could have helped if we saw it from both Clive and Ferris's point of view, and has a little bit more detail as to what was going on. And this, again, it was a bit of a tough scene to follow. So yeah, it could have been. I think it could have been a bit better written. I can kind of follow what's going on, but it doesn't seem like Clive was able to put his plan into action. Again, I have no idea what the point was for Ferris to wind up going back for the gears. I have no idea where he took out the officer, because I assume it was at the freighter. But then the other officer comes up to the freighter and he doesn't even see his mate there. So, it's... And also, he knocks the other officer out on the... He knocks the first one out on the piece of machinery. So it's a bit confusing. So the structure of the scene's a bit confusing, and it is one of those things where you kind of have to go with what's going on and not ask too many questions, because it is a bit difficult to imagine. And I also think the fight scene in the execution room where he's taking out all the stormtroopers, again, is a little bit hard to follow. It's a bit
complicated in the description. It makes it a bit difficult to follow what exactly Ferris is doing, or at least picture it. So, you know, it's a bit... Whereas... And I think it is just a bit... I think that's maybe my big critique with this chapter. It is a little bit hard to follow, but also I've been a bit out of breath today, and, you know, that can take its toll, so maybe it's just me. But, you know, that's also why I like doing these little reviews. It helps me recap the chapter in my head, and also get a bit of an understanding while skimming through the chapter, and understand things a little bit more. And the factory scene definitely makes a little bit more sense now that I've skimmed through it for this summary. But it still could have been a lot better done. I think it really could have just been done a lot better. So, yeah. That's really my main critique for this. I don't really have much else to say. Really, I really don't have anything else to say, really. So, yeah. Yeah, not really anything else to say. It's going to be interesting to see how they get out of this one. Again, I have the feeling that Trevor sort of and the arrays are going to come there and wind up rescuing them and giving them the cover. So I have a feeling that's what's going to happen. But, you know, we'll see. We'll see. I know the next chapter does focus on them. So, yeah. But, you know, if my summary of this factory scene made sense to you, then please let me know, because it does seem a bit confusing reading it. So, yeah. But, anyway. Actually, I'm going to have a quick skim through it again. Okay, I skimmed through it. It does not make any more sense to me. Because again, the point of the plan was to distract the guards and the officers over at the scene of over that where the whole thing had been broken. And you know, they're doing the manual count. We're getting ready to do the manual counting anyway. So it's a bit confusing. I think the factory scene. So yeah. Again, it could have just been better worded and gone into a bit more detail as to what was going on. You know, rather than just having it be solely Ferris's perspective, give us the wider scene. You know, maybe look into a bit more of what was the reasons for taking out the first officer, you know. Was it so he would then go away from the ramp? Or something? Yeah, I just don't know. I really don't know. So, yeah, it really just could have been much better worded, I think. And if it was better worded, it would have made a little bit more sense. You know, that's just my personal opinion. I'm going to end the review here. So, yeah, thank you all for watching, and goodbye.